All right, today I'm very excited to have David Kooger, who is the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Governance and Compliance at West Virginia University. Welcome,
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
excited. So, can you give us a short bio?
So I went to school at Texas A&M and I got my master's there as well. And then so I started interning in the compliance office. I knew I wanted to work in college athletics. I wasn't sure what area I exactly wanted to go into. So I dabbled with compliance, academics, but ultimately landed on compliance and enjoyed it and had some good relationships at Texas A&M. And then I was fortunate enough to get my first job at the University of Texas at El Paso, which is where Amy and I met eventually. And so I spent about 10 years there. And I stayed in El Paso for various reasons, not necessarily college athletics career wise. So there were some external factors that led to me staying in El Paso probably longer than I had planned, but I certainly loved it. I love El Paso. I still have a home in El Paso, so I have nothing bad to say about El Paso. But then I got a call about a job at West Virginia University, and so something that you wanted me to touch on is the networking piece, and I guess I'll throw that in there now. I got a call from their athletic director, and I did not personally know the athletic director, but he knew people that knew me. And so he had gotten my name from a few different people and thought I would be a good candidate for the position. And so he gave me a call and asked if I was interested. And so at that moment in time, I felt like it was the right move. And so I went forward with it. And it's been 14 months here, I guess. 14 months, yeah. So
So, you went from Conference USA to the Big 12.
I went
So,
from
that's
the, yes, I went from the small pond to the big pond. So,
so how was that transition now that you've been 14 months in? Was it a huge transition for you, or was the compliance piece the same and it was just learning a new university? What was different for you?
so learning the new university is definitely probably the biggest change. I mean, compliance is compliance wherever you are for the most part, at least Division One. So, learning the university policies, admission policies, transfer policies, things like that. Those are something that I had to adjust to. I think the other biggest piece that I had to deal with was essentially when I got here, I had no staff on staff here, so I had to hire four new people, and so that took some time, but we've got a good staff here now, and we're running like a well-oiled machine, I think.
So when you went to hire your staff, you were without staff. Did you put that out on a job board? Did you call people that you knew in the industry? How did you go about securing those four positions? And were they entry level positions?
So they are various positions. One was an entry level, the others were a little bit higher level. And my number two is certainly the highest of the four. In terms of where I posted it, I mean, I posted on NCAA jobs, I posted on NACDA, but I definitely did lean on people that I knew. I it was a funny story. I actually almost hired my former boss at UTEP to my number two position, but he got an opportunity somewhere else, so he took that one. But yeah, I think you never know how the job hiring process is going to work. One, my entry level position was somebody that was an intern with the compliance office, and I gotten some emails about it and said he was a good worker, so I vetted him a little bit and ended up hiring him. One of my directors is a former or her former boss was my assistant director at UTEP, so we have a great relationship, so he highly recommended her. And then pretty much everybody came recommended for the most part. And my number two that I hired, he actually reached out to me. He saw the job posting and reached out to me, and I kind of had known him through his time. He was at another Conference USA school at the time.
So you mentioned that you had spent 10 years at UTEP, probably a little longer than you intended. The students are asking questions like, is it okay to spend 2 years or 3 years at some place and move on? Is that industry standard? And so you alluded to it. So Why did you make that allusion? Why did you allude to staying there longer than you probably would have normally? Why do you mention that?
Well, I think everybody's different. I mean, I think the general consensus is don't job hop too much because you're a bit of a risk, and generally they're not going to want to hire somebody that's been at a place for 1 or 2 years and four different spots. So I think the reason I brought that up is I had some opportunities to leave, and I essentially got promoted from within at UTEP and didn't feel like, but there were other things pulling me to stay at UTEP, not just the job, and you've been at El Paso for a
Mhm,
long time, Amy. And
mhm.
once you sort of create that community, the group of friends, the networking, I mean, El Paso's a very, I feel like, you always know somebody that can do something and can help you out with something. And so that's, I think, what a lot of people are looking for in terms of a place to live. And I was very comfortable. I had a good job. I had some side businesses, um and so I was comfortable there. But I think not until they called me at West Virginia did I really feel at that time I was ready to move on. So that's kind of the reason why I made the jump.
They do refer to it as the biggest small city in the United
Yeah,
States with something like
yeah,
1.2 million people on any given day,
yeah,
but feels much smaller. And there's essentially 1 degree of separation from you to me and knowing somebody else in El Paso
yeah.
because everyone's related somehow. And it's something
Yes.
that most students I think don't realize. They think of El Paso as being a one horse town, and not realizing that we swell the 2 million,
Yep.
each and every day. So it's kind of an
Yeah.
interesting concept. So let's move into compliance just a little bit, and see if are you able to speak to the mission of fairness with the NCAA?
So I don't deal with that idea very often or much at all. But I think the idea of fairness and equity is certainly been at the core of what the NCAA stands for in terms of making rules that are applicable across the divisions. So it doesn't matter if you're at a Power Five institution, doesn't matter if you're at a Group of Five institution, you pretty much operate under the same rules. And the idea behind that is to provide as much equity as possible. Now, ultimately, we know that they're not the same. Alabama is not the same as UTEP, and Alabama is not the same as West Virginia. I mean, they just have different resources from a football perspective, and so it's not always equitable. But there's a reason why they limit how many coaches you can have, so that hypothetically doesn't have an advantage because they can afford an extra 10 coaches that UTEP can't afford. So I think that's kind of at the core of what the NCAA has always been. I think that may be shifting in the coming years, but originally that's kind of what they wanted to establish as fairness and
Okay.
equitability.
Another
I should say.
another question that we have, the violations, there are level one, level two, and level three violations. And the students will be writing a reinstatement letter. Do you deal with reinstatement letters in your position, or do you have staff that do?
So, so we're organized by sport. So I deal with football, and then I have my other staff deal with some of the other sports. So they deal mostly with everything as it relates to that sport. So recruiting, playing in practice seasons, etc. So I deal with it from a football perspective. Reinstatement letters are not, I wouldn't say they're uncommon. They're not overly common when it comes to, usually a reinstatement letter involves a student athlete because they're either ineligible for a particular reason and they need to get reinstated by the NCAA to be able to compete again. So those are generally the reinstatement letters that we take part in. But
What would be the
other than
reasons for those ineligibility?
so we had an example where there was a student athlete that got into some trouble at their previous institution, and then they had called us about it. And so we had to file a reinstatement for that individual because they had gotten whatever they had gotten at the previous school, and the NCAA ruled him ineligible. So we had to go through the whole reinstatement process, and sometimes that involves a repayment of some sort. Sometimes it involves a suspension of some sort. So it can vary from different degrees of violation can indicate what the penalties are going to be.
So in that
So
particular instance, it was not a violation of academics, it was a violation of some other aspect.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
and so we have to go through the process of reinstating him, and what does that look like, and how many games does he have to serve, and what does he have to pay back, etc. So, and it's not always that big, it's not always that complicated, but certainly when it gets to a higher level of benefit, we have to go through a certain process. And sometimes it's very simple. It could be $100. Excuse me. It could be $100 and they're reinstated, right? So there's different processes for different level of violation.
So you mentioned something that I find interesting. You said that at West Virginia University, your compliance office is separated by sport, meaning you take care of football and the other staff members take care of the other sports. Was it also structured that way at UTEP, and are all compliance offices structured that way?
So it was not the same at UTEP. We only had 3 people. I had one person that concentrated on financial aid, so that was her only responsibility. It's really tough to, I mean, you can do it, but it's a really tough to separate by sport if you have a really small staff. I think it's a lot more feasible and efficient if you have a bigger staff. So not all departments are organized that way. I know some that are, I know some that aren't. So everybody has different philosophies on what's the most efficient way to construct your department. I generally take the approach of whatever's best for the department, whatever's best for my staff. So I don't generally like to pigeonhole people into a certain bylaw, for example, because then they don't have experience with some of the other bylaws. So when you have, say, women's tennis, you do all of the bylaws for women's tennis. So you're responsible for everything for women's tennis. So in that sense, you may not be dealing with the higher profile sports, but your responsibility is to deal with all aspects of compliance. And I generally think that's the best way to approach it and the best way to give, my staff the experience and development that they're looking for.
So let's say you do have someone who is in compliance for tennis. What does that job entail for that particular compliance officer on the day to day if they're dealing with tennis? What is the gamut of their responsibilities?
So all the responsibilities are generally the same when it comes to each sport. I mean, each sport has separate rules, so you might have different rules to deal with, but they're generally the same. So just for example, we need your playing season declared, we need your staff declaration into our office by the start of the year. There's different recruiting, any recruiting logs that come into the system, we have to check, make sure that they've submitted recruiting logs. So none of that necessarily changes across the sports, but you might have some nuanced things that tennis has to deal with that football does not have to deal with, or vice versa. So I think the day to day is to, get what we need from that sport, and then to also file waivers, provide interpretations to them for whatever questions they may have. So that's generally the brunt of what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Plus financial aid, plus
Yeah.
eligibility.
So I have somebody that is specifically handles financial aid in my office. However, they communicate very well with each sport liaison, to make sure that they're up to date with what their sport is, from a financial aid perspective, from a scholarship perspective.
So the students are reading the manual, and they do see in the manual the highlighted grays area that say, except for tennis and basketball, for certain, those exceptions that exist. And so I guess that's why it would be important to have someone who's well versed in each area. Do you have compliance officers who deal with more than one sport?
Yeah, so all of my staff, other than financial aid, they deal with multiple sports. So I'm the only one that deals with football. That's my main sport, but I deal with certainly high level topics, high level issues. If there's a high level issue in men's basketball or any other sport, I'm usually the one that handles that, or at least make sure that that process goes smoothly. So, but football, it's the big boy, so they require a lot of attention, and so but I'm happy to work with them. I really enjoy football. So
So what would you consider a high level incident or a high level issue? You can use
well,
UTEP as an example if you want, since you're no longer there.
yeah, I mean it can range from either a waiver, but most of the time it's a specific violation or something like that where you need to get multiple people involved, like general counsel or outside counsel. So I've had some of those here where I'm handling a lot of the information that comes in. So any type of waiver, lawsuits, anything like that that directly deal with our sports, it's something that I have my hand in, certainly.
So at UTEP, when we were both there, whenever there was a compliance issue, I would be told, go talk to David Kooger, and he's going to say no. His first answer is going to be no. The answer is going to be no. You cannot do X, Y, or Z until he has reviewed the rule in its entirety and all of its nuances. Do you perceive yourself as being no first, let me review, or do you see yourself as being yes, we can do that, and then realize no, you can't?
So I don't say no necessarily right off the bat, but I certainly want to make sure that what they want to do is permissible. So I actually had this conversation with my football ops guy this morning. I generally ask one of two questions, like, do you want to do this? So sometimes they get requests, and I ask, do you want to do this? Because I don't mind being the bad guy to the outside
Mhm.
external people. I'm like, no, you can't do it from a compliance perspective. I don't even look into it. I just tell them no. But when it comes to the coaches and what they want, I always ask them, what is it ultimately that you want to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Because otherwise, they ask me a question, and on the surface, if I do my research, the answer may be no, but then they follow up with another question. And then you go through the whole rigmarole again. So I want to get to, what do you want to do? What is ultimately your goal in all of this? And I'll see if I can make it work. If I can't make it work, it just is what it is. So I don't say no off the bat. I say, well, if I don't know, then I'll look into it and let you know. So I think that I would generally take um, that
Err on the side of
approach.
caution.
Yeah, instead of saying yes, because unless I absolutely know it's a yes, then I'm probably going to end up putting my foot in my mouth at the end of the day.
So err on the side of caution would be your
until
biggest.
until until we can find the answer, until we can do our research, and that's generally the right approach. I mean, I think with any endeavor, any department within athletics, like, they expect you to have the answers right off the bat, but very rarely do people have the answers right off the bat.
Well,
So
they obviously haven't looked at the manual.
yeah, they haven't worked at the manual, but even in other areas, I think it can take some time to find answers that people are requesting, whether it's donors, whether it's outside entities. So it's not always so simple. Like, we don't have everything memorized off the top of our brain when it comes to all aspects of the athletics department.
And there's no shame in asking a question.
No,
No shame.
no shame.
No
It's a,
shame.
it's a lot of information. It's a lot of information for us, and we're the supposed experts. So if you think of it from another perspective, where they're maybe not, that's not their day to day. Their day to day is coaching, or their day to day is development, or their day to day is something else. I can't expect them to know all of the rules, because they shouldn't expect us to know all the rules. So, yeah, it's a complicated world, but I think we do a pretty good job of working through it.
Well, I've spoken with another compliance officer who mentioned, you have violations level one, level two, and level three, and you have to file the paperwork. And that there's also no shame in making a mistake and acknowledging it and being upfront about it and reporting, your self-reporting to the NCAA. Can you explain what self-reporting is all about?
So self-reporting is essentially let's just say I text message an individual too early. So say they're a freshman in high school and I send them a text. That's not permissible. But hypothetically, like we have some monitoring avenues that we take to monitor text message and phone calls, but unless we catch it, unless he tells us or she tells us, we're not going to know. So self-reporting is essentially where you report the violation to us saying, hey, I made a mistake. This is what happened. So it's important, and I think it shows a lot of things, but it's important to report violations. And I know I've been through a major infractions case at UTEP, so I generally have an understanding of how it goes and what the NCAA is looking for. And so they view us reporting level 3 as a good thing. So when we report violations, the NCAA views that as having institutional control. So I do not shy away from reporting violations. I think that's a good thing. I think it shows that, especially when our coaches are self-reporting violations, that shows hopefully some good integrity and that they're not trying to hide anything from us. So yeah, so it's an important it's an important piece of what we do. And anybody that says that they don't have violations are not dealing with human beings, apparently, because human beings make mistakes. I make mistakes every day. You're gonna make mistakes, and it's better to report them up front and help mitigate some of the punishment.
So I'm a type A, firstborn, rule follower. So for me, compliance makes complete and utter sense. That's, it's a rule, and I don't see shades of gray in rules unless there is a rule in the NCAA manual that's shaded gray. But that is my personality. When you have compliance officers, do you find that the compliance officers that you have are like that, type A, firstborn, rule followers, or are they across the spectrum?
I would find that most are. I would say that the best compliance people generally come from that tree, but I mean, you can have bad compliance people that don't really care about the rules and let them do whatever they want. So, I mean, that's not a good way to approach things at all. But I think just like I describe it to people, my job or our job is a mix between a lawyer and a cop. So we have the enforcement piece. So that's the cop area. And then we also have the legislation piece. We have the waiver piece. And that's more the lawyer side. So, you know, just like in law, there is gray, and coaches like to live in the gray. So we do whatever we can within the rules with what we believe is permissible to allow for whatever the coaches want to do. And so it's one of those things where sometimes we'll discuss as a group to make sure that we're all okay with it. If it's a issue that we're not 100% on, but we want to provide our coaches and our staff the ability to do their job. And if we can provide them with a good interpretation that doesn't violate the rule, then I'm all for it. But I'm generally like you. I'm type A that is a rule follower. And when I first got into the business, it was all about following the rules, and I didn't understand as much the gray area. But so now I live a lot more in the gray, but I don't think that necessarily means that I've compromised any of my integrity or, ethics along the way.
Excellent. So you did mention something about your graduate. So you went to A&M undergrad, and then you got a master's degree. Were those degrees in sports or sports management, or were they completely different
Yeah,
things?
sport management. Yep. So, yeah. Actually, my undergrad, I should clarify. My undergrad was at another institution, the Texas A&M. I went to a small school, Division 3. So I don't necessarily mention that school because most people don't know where that is. So Texas A&M is usually the more prominent, at least university that I've been to. But I did my undergrad both in physical education and then sport management, kinesiology.
So the video will be shared actually with students at an NAIA school and
Okay.
students at a D3 school. So what school did you happen to attend?
Okay, so I went to Calvin College. It's in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I believe it's called Calvin University now. So it is not Calvin College anymore, but it's Calvin University. And so my brother, sister went there. My family has a history of going there. So it is something that I wanted to continue the legacy, if you will. And so, yeah, that's where I got my undergrad.
And then what made you select A&M?
So, I mean, I really didn't have a whole lot of insight, to be honest, but my academic advisor said that Texas A&M had a good sport management program, and so I just remember for some reason it was my number one school. And then when I got in, I just knew I was going. I don't know why. I don't know, can't really explain why, but it wasn't, I guess I believed my advisor that they were a really good school. And so when I got in, I decided I was moving all the way down to Texas, and it was a great experience. And well, I've been in Texas for most of my adult life, so I definitely consider Texas home. And but I moved a little bit away now, but hopefully we can get back there sometime.
So when you went to A&M, were they still part of the Big 12 or had they made the jump to the SEC?
So they're still part of the Big 12. I believe the year that I graduated, that following year, they went to the SEC. I actually got a shirt from a friend of mine that said, I don't know, it had something, it was something to do with their transition to the SEC. So I was literally a part of the Big 12 for, I think, the last year that we were.
So having served time in Conference USA and now serving time in the Big 12, are there differences with conferences when you're discussing compliance?
Not really. I mean, we all just generally discuss the same things. So unless the rules drastically change between the Power Five, Power Four, if you will, because the Pac-12 is not really a thing anymore, Power Four and the Group of Five, we're going to be discussing the same things. And so I think a lot of maybe our issues are a little bit more on the NIL side of things, for example, like dealing with collectives, because some of the smaller schools don't have as big of a presence in that aspect. So there are some issues that are a little bit different or on a bigger scale, but generally we talk about the same things.
Excellent. All right. We certainly thank you for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to help.
Well,